There are photographs that tell the truth about a man in ways no interview ever could. Somewhere, buried deep in the archives of Hollywood's golden era, there is one of him. Young, jaw like carved granite, eyes carrying a light that the whole world once wanted to borrow. He was the kind of man that cinema invented itself to worship. And yet, if you look closely at the photographs taken of him now, at 70 years old, weathered and quiet in a way that fame never prepared him for, you begin to sense something the headlines never quite managed to capture. Not defeat. Not quite. Something closer to a man standing at the edge of an enormous ocean, finally alone with everything he has done and everything that was done to him. What does it cost a man to become a legend? What does it cost him to fall from one? And what does the world owe the version of him that survived? The version that keeps walking, keeps working, keeps believing in something most people stopped trying to name years ago. Before you decide you already know this story, ask yourself one question. Do you know what it felt like to be Mel Gibson at his loneliest? Because that story, the real one, is far more haunting and far more human than anything you have seen written about him in 30 years. He was born in Peekskill, New York, on January 3, 1956, the sixth of 11 children in a house that was always full and somehow always a little bit tight. Hutton Gibson, his father, was a formidable man, deeply Catholic, deeply stubborn, deeply convinced that the world outside was trying to take something from his family. When Mel was 12 years old, Hutton made a decision that would quietly shape the entire trajectory of his son's life. He moved the family to Australia, not because of opportunity, not because of adventure, but because Hutton had won a game show, Jeopardy, of all things, and used the money to uproot 11 children and a wife and replant them on the other side of the world, partly to keep his eldest sons from being drafted into the Vietnam War. Imagine being 12 years old and watching everything familiar disappear. The streets you knew, the language of the playground, the particular geography of belonging that every child builds so carefully, all of it gone. Replaced by the dry heat of New South Wales, by an accent that marked you as foreign, by the particular cruelty that children reserve for anyone who arrives from somewhere else. Mel Gibson did not slot neatly into Australia. He had to fight for his place in it. Literally, sometimes, with fists, in schoolyards where his American voice was enough to earn him enemies before he had spoken 3 sentences. And yet there was something in that displacement that did something to him. It gave him a quality that the best actors carry like a hidden frequency, the knowledge of what it feels like to not belong, to perform belonging, to become someone slightly different in order to survive a room. His mother, and was the warmth in the house. A gentle Irish Catholic woman who sang, who prayed, who held the family together with the particular grace that only certain mothers possess. She gave him music. She gave him a sense that beauty was not weakness. His father gave him toughness and theology and a suspicion of the world that would echo through his entire adult life in ways both protective and destructive. He studied at the National Institute of Dramatic Art in Sydney, NIDA, as Australians call it, and it was there that something ignited. Not immediately, not with the clean arc of a talent show discovery. He was raw, uncertain, still carrying the awkwardness of a boy who had never quite settled into his own skin. But there was something in the way he could go still in front of a camera, a quality that directors would later struggle to describe. Not magnetism exactly, not charisma in the conventional sense, but a realness that the lens loved without being able to explain why. The wound that shaped everything came quietly, the way the deepest wounds always do. It did not arrive as a single catastrophic event. It arrived as an accumulation, a slow pressure, a long inheritance of pain. Hutton Gibson's Catholicism was not the gentle, candle-lit faith of parish halls and Sunday picnics. It was severe, structured, resistant to the reforms of the Second Vatican Council in ways that put the family outside the mainstream of even traditional Catholic practice. Mel grew up believing in a God who was real, present, and demanding. A God before whom men were accountable in ways that terrified as much as they comforted. For a boy with a father like Hutton, brilliant, domineering, capable of great warmth, but also great rigidity, faith became something complicated. It was the air in the house, inescapable, nourishing in some ways and suffocating in others. Mel absorbed it completely. He never stopped believing. But belief, when it is inherited rather than chosen, can sit in a person like a splinter, working its way deeper over time. He would spend decades trying to reconcile the faith of his father's house with the chaos of the life he actually lived. The drinking, the failures, the rages, the public disasters. The cross is a recurring symbol in everything he has ever made, and it is not decoration. It is autobiography. The lowest point arrived in the summer of 2006, like something from a cautionary myth. Mel Gibson was already a man carrying more weight than most people knew. His film The Passion of the Christ, released in 2004, had been both his greatest artistic triumph and a lightning rod for controversy so intense it had changed the quality of the air around him. He had poured $47 million of his own money into that film. He had been warned, dismissed, mocked, and accused before a single person outside his circle had seen a frame of it. And then it had earned over $600 million at the global box office and broken something open in the world, proved that there was an audience for something that the industry had decided did not exist. But the cost. Nobody talked about the cost. On July 28, 2006, in Malibu, California, Mel Gibson was pulled over by a sheriff's deputy named James Me. He was drunk. He said things, vile, hateful things, that were recorded and leaked and spread across the world within hours. Anti-Semitic things. Things that could not be explained away, that could not be softened in the retelling, that detonated his public standing with the speed and thoroughness of a controlled demolition. He was 50 years old. He had spent 30 years building something extraordinary, and in the space of a single night, in the glare of a Malibu road, he watched it begin to collapse. What followed was not simply professional exile. It was the exposure of something dark that had lived in him, something shaped, perhaps, by his father's conspiratorial worldview, by decades of alcohol, by the particular ugliness that emerges when a man who has never properly dealt with his own damage reaches the end of his rope in public. He apologized. He wanted treatment. He lost his marriage, his long marriage to Robin Moore, the woman who had been beside him since he was a young actor with nothing to his name, ended after 31 years and 7 children. The woman who had known the boy before the legend was gone. And he was alone in a way that fame offers no preparation for. There were no cameras this time that could fix it. No script with a third act. Just a man in a house in Malibu, staring at what he had broken. Here is what the world does not know how to hold simultaneously. Mel Gibson, at his lowest, did not stop believing. He did not stop working. He did not drown. And that is not the simple, triumphant story it sounds like when you compress it into a sentence. The truth is slower and more painful. The truth is a man getting up every morning in the ruins of his reputation and choosing, for reasons that only he fully understands, to keep going, to keep making things, to keep praying in his private, complicated, inherited way to the God he had been given as a child and never managed to put down. There was a period, roughly 2007 to 2011, when Hollywood treated Mel Gibson like a man who had died, but not yet had the grace to lie down. Projects evaporated. Friendships cooled to professional distance. The industry is not known for its compassion toward people who have destroyed themselves publicly, and Gibson's self-destruction had been spectacular enough to make even hardened executives look away. He spent those years in a kind of internal exile. He bought land in Costa Rica. He worked on projects that went nowhere. He drank, and then he stopped drinking, and then he started again, and then he stopped again for good, or so the current evidence suggests. He had a son, Lars, with his then-girlfriend Oksana Grigorieva, And that relationship collapsed into a public nightmare of recordings and restraining orders and headlines so savage they seemed designed to finish whatever the 2006 arrest had started. But somewhere in those years, somewhere in the wreckage, something was being rebuilt. Not a public image. Something quieter and more important than that. A man was being rebuilt. Stripped of everything that could be stripped away, he was left with only the things that could not be taken. His faith, however battered. His craft, however dormant. His children, all 8 of them, scattered across the architecture of his complicated personal history, but present, real, his. The cross he had built his masterpiece around. The cross he had never stopped carrying, in his own imperfect, wounded, very human way. The first sign that he was not finished came in 2012, with his performance in Get the Gringo, a film he co-wrote and produced, shot in Mexico, lean and fierce and alive in a way that surprised critics who had written his obituary. It was not a triumphant comeback. It was something more honest than that. It was a man showing up and doing the work. And the work was good. Then came The Expendables 3 in 2014, a commercial machine that nonetheless reminded audiences that his screen presence, that strange, specific gravitational pull, had not faded. And then, in 2016, Hacksaw Ridge, the film about Desmond Doss, the Seventh-day Adventist conscientious objector who saved 75 men on a Pacific island without ever firing a weapon, earned Mel Gibson his first Academy Award nomination for Best Director in 20 years. The film was a masterpiece of controlled violence and radical grace. It was, in every frame, a meditation on faith under impossible circumstances. It was the most personal film he had made since The Passion of the Christ, and the most widely celebrated film he had made since Braveheart. Hollywood did not exactly forgive him. Hollywood is not in the forgiveness business. But it did something almost as powerful. It remembered why it had loved him in the first place. Braveheart. The word alone carries a freight of memory. 1995. The Scottish Highlands recreated in Ireland. Gibson on horseback. Gibson in mud and blue face paint and righteous fury. Gibson directing from the saddle and in the editing room and everywhere in between. The film won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. It made him something rarer than a movie star. It made him a filmmaker of genuine ambition, a man who could hold an epic inside his head and get it onto a screen without losing the human heartbeat at the center. William Wallace's freedom cry has echoed across 30 years of popular culture. It remains one of the most visceral moments in blockbuster cinema. And before that, Mad Max Lethal Weapon, The Road Warrior, a young man with almost nothing, auditioning for George Miller's post-apocalyptic nightmare with a face so battered from a recent bar fight that Miller thought he had found exactly the ravaged protagonist he was looking for. Mel Gibson has always worn damage well, perhaps because so much of it was real. The personal truths are harder to hold. 7 Children with Robin Moore. The boys and girls who grew up watching their father be worshipped by the world and then watching the world turn on him. The divorce in 2011, after Robin had spent 3 decades being the steadying presence behind everything. The turbulent relationship with Oksana Grigorieva, which produced Lars and produced some of the ugliest public recordings of a private man's worst moments. And then, quietly, a relationship with Rosalind Ross, 35 years his junior, with whom he had a son, Lars Gerard, born in 2017. His 9th child. He was 61 years old. What does fatherhood mean to a man like this? What does it mean to look at a newborn son when you are 61 and know that by the time that child is ready to enter the world, you will be old in ways that cannot be managed or directed away? There is something both humbling and aching about that image. A man who spent his 40s destroying everything he had built, spending his 60s trying to leave something worth inheriting. The faith that runs through his life like a river, sometimes clear, sometimes muddied, sometimes underground and invisible, but always present. must carry some answer to that question, must be part of what pulls him forward on the mornings when forward feels like the wrong direction. At 70, Mel Gibson works. He produces, he directs, he acts when the right material appears. He has spoken in interviews about his faith with a directness that most public figures avoid, not performing belief for the cameras, but stating it plainly, as a man states a fact about himself that he has stopped being embarrassed by. He believes in the Catholic God of his father's house, in the mystery of suffering, in the idea that what we make with our hands and our talent is in some way an offering, however imperfect, however complicated by the human being doing the offering. He is working on a sequel to The Passion of the Christ, tentatively titled The Resurrection of the Christ. He has been working on it for years. It may arrive. It may not. But the fact of its existence, the fact that a man who was professionally finished 18 years ago is still reaching for the most ambitious creative project of his career, says something that 100 interviews could not. What does it say about what we owe each other? What does it say about the gap between what a person has done and what a person is? These are not comfortable questions. They were not designed to be. And now this is where the script turns and speaks directly to you, the person watching this, wherever you are. You have heard the worst of this man. You probably knew most of it before you pressed play. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you may have wondered whether there was any justification for spending 30 minutes with his story. Whether a man who said what he said on that Malibu roadside in 2006 deserved the attention, deserved the examination, deserved the kind of care that a documentary like this one tries to bring to a human life. Here is what I want to leave you with. Not a verdict, not an absolution, something more uncomfortable than either of those things. Every person you will ever meet is the product of wounds they did not choose and choices they made badly with the tools they were given. Every person is carrying something that would look ugly in the light of a camera and a leaked audio recording. That is not a reason to excuse the inexcusable. What Mel Gibson said was inexcusable. What he did in his worst years was real and caused real damage to real people. None of that disappears. But the cross, that symbol he built a film around, that image he has carried through every version of his public life, means something specific in the tradition he grew up in. It means that what is broken can be held, that what is lost can be mourned, that a man at 70, still reaching for something, still trying to make things that mean something, is not finished in any of the ways that matter. You are going to face a moment, perhaps you already have, when the worst version of yourself becomes visible to the people you most need to respect you. When the gap between who you are and who you wanted to be becomes impossible to hide. And in that moment, the question will not be whether you deserve another chance. The question will be whether you have the courage to ask for one anyway. Whether you can stand in the wreckage and keep going. Whether the faith you carry, in whatever form it takes for you, is strong enough to survive contact with your own worst truths. Mel Gibson at 70 is still standing, still working, still carrying the cross of who he has been toward whatever he is trying to become. Whether that is enough is a question only he can answer, in rooms no camera has access to, in the language of a faith that has never entirely made sense to the world that watches him. What are you still carrying? And what will you build with it? Now that you know you are not the only one.